I am the leader of the revolution, not the leader of the country.
Did an African leader really help take down Gaddafi? Let's rewind to October 20th, 2011, a day that stunned the entire African continent. Word spread fast. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's longtime ruler, was dead. Conflicting reports swirled across the airwaves. Some said he was killed by NATO airstrikes, others claimed local rebels dragged him from a drainpipe and executed him. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Gaddafi was gone, and Africa was left shaken. But what most people don't know is that an African president, one Gaddafi considered a friend, played a key role in the events that led to his downfall. Who was this leader? Which country did he lead? And why would he turn on someone who had once helped shape his nation's destiny? Let's break it down. The visionary that was Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi wasn't just a Libyan leader. For over 40 years, he was a force in African politics, a bold, defiant figure who dreamed of a truly united Africa. He envisioned a United States of Africa with one passport, one army, and a shared economy. Gaddafi put his wealth and his mouth behind that vision, funding infrastructure, militaries, and political movements across the continent. He wasn't just admired, he was deeply respected by many African leaders. But among all of them, he had a soft spot for one country in particular: Uganda. And at the heart of that relationship was one man, President Yoweri Museveni. A brotherhood, or so it seemed. Gaddafi had supported Uganda long before Museveni ever took power. Back in the 1970s, when Idi Amin ruled the country with an iron fist, it was Gaddafi who propped him up. Whenever Amin faced threats to his regime, whether internal or from foreign enemies, Gaddafi sent troops, money, and weapons to keep him afloat. That loyalty earned him a revered place in Uganda's political memory. So, when Museveni rose to power, Gaddafi expected a continuation of that relationship. And for a while, it seemed like a genuine friendship had formed. The two leaders exchanged visits, worked on regional projects, and presented themselves as brothers in the African struggle for sovereignty. But behind the scenes, Museveni was watching the global winds shift, and he was making calculations of his own. The betrayal begins. By 2011, Gaddafi was under intense pressure. The Arab Spring had reached Libya's doorstep. Protesters were in the streets. Western powers were eyeing regime change. Gaddafi needed allies, and he expected Museveni to have his back. But Museveni stayed silent. Then, he started quietly cooperating with the West. In diplomatic circles, it's said that Museveni gave a green light for intervention. Some claim he passed on intelligence. Others say he offered verbal support behind closed doors. Either way, his refusal to stand up for Gaddafi was deafening. That silence spoke volumes, and it helped isolate Gaddafi even further. After the fall, a letter of regret. Years later, in 2016, Museveni tried to rewrite the story. He wrote an open letter condemning the US and the African Union for what happened in Libya. He criticized the West for interfering in the Middle East and decried the toppling of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi as reckless. But by then, it was too late. People remembered that when Gaddafi needed friends the most, Museveni wasn't there. So why did Museveni turn on Gaddafi? To answer that, we have to go deeper into how their relationship formed and what made it crumble. As mentioned, Gaddafi's ties to Uganda ran deep, dating back to the 1970s. His financial, military, and emotional investment in Uganda was real. But politics is rarely about friendship. It's about survival. Museveni saw that aligning too closely with Gaddafi would put him on the wrong side of the West. And with Western military aid, diplomatic recognition, and influence keeping his government stable, Museveni chose to protect his own grip on power. That choice may have sealed Gaddafi's fate.
The price of betrayal.
Gaddafi's loyalty, Museveni's ambition. It's a story that hits deep about friendship, power, and betrayal on a continental scale. For years, Muammar Gaddafi poured time, money, and trust into building relationships with leaders across Africa. But one of the most personal and ultimately painful connections he ever made was with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni. Despite everything Gaddafi did for him, it ended in betrayal. Let's walk through how that happened. From exile to ally back. In 1979, after facing mounting resistance and foreign-backed offensives, Uganda's then president, Idi Amin, was forced to flee the country. His first stop, Libya, under the welcoming protection of none other than Gaddafi. Eventually, Amin settled in Saudi Arabia, but the Libya connections stayed strong. With Amin gone, Uganda held elections in 1980, but the outcome didn't go the way Yoweri Museveni had hoped. He lost, and like many who crave power above all else, he cried foul. Museveni declared the elections rigged and launched a guerrilla war against the sitting government. What followed was a brutal civil conflict that would reshape Uganda and change the fate of Africa forever. Outgunned and desperate. At the time, Museveni and his ragtag rebel group were outmatched, low on both weapons and strategy. He needed help, and fast. So he went knocking. First, he approached the United States and the United Kingdom, hoping for military support. But they turned him down. Why? His close association with Gaddafi made them wary. So, Museveni did what he had to do. He turned to the one man he knew would say yes, Muammar Gaddafi. And without hesitation, Gaddafi delivered.
The power exchange.
Gaddafi provided Museveni with weapons, ammunition, and military expertise. Everything he needed to survive, and eventually win. He didn't just help Museveni once, he backed him through multiple critical stages of the Ugandan Bush War. By 1986, Museveni's forces had toppled the government, and Gaddafi had played a direct role in making that happen. Even after the war, the support didn't stop. Museveni's army received training from Libyan experts, and when he formed Uganda's secret intelligence services, he modeled them after Libya's. The influence was that deep. To the outside world, it looked like Uganda had become Gaddafi's second home. He visited often, funded major infrastructure projects, and invested in Uganda's development in ways no Western leader ever did. So, why the betrayal? And yet, despite all this, when the time came to return that loyalty, Museveni turned his back. Power changes people, and for Museveni, staying in power meant aligning with Western interests, not defending the man who helped him rise. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was political. It was the kind of betrayal that would eventually leave Gaddafi exposed, isolated, and vulnerable.
How Gaddafi bankrolled Uganda
and got burned. Muammar Gaddafi didn't just talk about African unity, he put his money where his mouth was. And when it came to Uganda, he invested like it was home. Through Libya's African investment portfolio, Gaddafi bought a 51% controlling stake in Uganda Telecom, the country's main telecom provider, and secured 60% ownership of Tristar Limited, a major textile company. But his vision went far beyond business. At one point, Gaddafi convinced President Museveni not to export Uganda's crude oil to Europe or the West. Instead, he promised to help Uganda build its own oil refinery, plus pipelines to Kenya and neighboring countries. Gaddafi wasn't just offering advice, he was offering self-reliance. The money kept flowing. Gaddafi pumped millions into Uganda's real estate and financial sectors too. He invested in Tropical Bank of Africa, National Housing Corporation, Lake Victoria Hotel, and several other ventures that boosted Uganda's economy. But his generosity didn't stop with business. Gaddafi even helped fund the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, the same group that Museveni supported during their 1980 invasion of Rwanda. Gaddafi sent them weapons, which the Museveni government flew into Uganda. That's how deep their alliance ran. And that's exactly what made the betrayal so bitter. A kingdom, a palace, a legacy. Gaddafi's fingerprints were all over Uganda's landscape. In 2001, he took a special interest in the Toro Kingdom, a traditional monarchy in western Uganda. At the time, King Oyo Nyimba Kabamba Iguru Rukidi IV was only 9 years old. But that didn't stop Gaddafi from showing love. He personally funded upgrades to the kingdom, including the construction of the Toro Royal Palace, just because he admired the heritage and the symbolism it represented. Faith, friendship, and foreshadowing. Then there's the legacy Gaddafi left with Uganda's Muslim community. He financed the construction of what is now one of the largest mosques in East Africa, a towering structure that can hold over 3,000 worshippers. It's still a landmark of Islamic faith and African unity in Kampala today. Whenever Gaddafi visited Uganda, it felt like a reunion. He'd joke with Museveni about staying in power for life, even questioning why leaders bothered with elections at all. During one such visit, he even personally promoted one of Museveni's sons from captain to major, a symbolic gesture that spoke volumes. Gaddafi saw Uganda as a brother nation. He believed in Museveni. He invested in his dreams. But loyalty like that is a rare currency in international politics, and in this story, it didn't pay off the way Gaddafi hoped. Want to dive into how that relationship unraveled next? Let me know, and we'll explore how those investments turned into political. Did you know Muammar Gaddafi played a key role in helping President Museveni win Uganda's 2001 and 2006 elections? Their bond looked rock solid, like it could never break. But as we'll see, that loyalty didn't last forever. Before we dive deeper, drop your thoughts about African unity in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you're the first to catch more stories about Africa's journey toward unity. What really made Museveni turn against Gaddafi? When you think about the dream of a United States of Africa, two names always come up: Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi wasn't just talk, he was a man on a mission to unite the continent. Back in 1989, at a historic summit, Gaddafi convinced 45 African heads of state to replace the old Organization of African Unity with the brand new African Union, a bold step toward continental unity. For more than a decade after that, he was the African Union's biggest champion, pushing a vision for a United States of Africa, complete with a unified military and a single currency. He saw the African Union as the vehicle to make that vision real. And during his reign, Libya contributed nearly 15% of the funding for African Union projects. Why the pushback? But not everyone was on board. Many African leaders saw Gaddafi's ambitions as a threat to their own power, influence, and control. And of course, Western nations, who preferred a fragmented Africa, felt the same fear. Surprisingly, Yoweri Museveni, who had benefited immensely from Gaddafi's support, ended up opposing the idea too. Despite everything Gaddafi had done for him, Museveni's stance would mark the beginning of a complicated and ultimately bitter break between the two leaders. Want to know what pushed Museveni to turn his back on his former ally? Stick around, because the next part of this story unravels the power plays, betrayals, and politics that shaped modern Africa's path. Gaddafi had poured a lot into Uganda, backing Museveni through some of his toughest moments. So why did Museveni end up rejecting Gaddafi's bold vision for a United States of Africa? At first, it came down to power. Museveni saw Gaddafi's plan as a direct threat to his control over Uganda. Sure, he praised Gaddafi's ideas publicly, but deep down, he wasn't about to hand over any real authority to another African leader. For Museveni, it was simple. It's either him in charge or no one else. At the same time, Museveni's influence was on the rise, not just in Uganda but across the region. He wasn't just sitting back, he was taking action, sending troops into Somalia and backing Western interests on the ground. On top of that, he was reportedly offering intellectual support to CIA commanders, putting Western agendas ahead of African unity. So when the idea of unifying Africa came up at the 2007 African Union Conference in Accra, Ghana, Museveni didn't hold back. He rejected it outright, worried that pushing for African unity would spark conflict with the Western powers who kept him in power, and who could just as easily pull the plug on him. Museveni also feared what it would mean to cut ties with Gaddafi, not just politically, but financially and militarily. He knew going against Gaddafi was one thing, but opposing the West, that was a whole different game. And in the end, Museveni's resistance sped up Gaddafi's fall. On June 13, 2008, during his son's graduation ceremony in the US, Museveni gave a telling nod to Gennady Fraser, the Assistant Secretary General of State for African Affairs. He made it clear, because of Africa's deep cultural and language divides, a united continent just wasn't practical. But he didn't stop there. Museveni accused Gaddafi of buying off smaller African nations to secure their support, essentially muzzling them at the African Union and other international platforms. The tension between the two men escalated further when Museveni warned that if things with Gaddafi kept heating up, his plane could be attacked, even while flying in international airspace. He turned to the United States for protection, and they didn't hesitate to offer help. Meanwhile, Gaddafi wasn't as worried about the US connection as he was about Museveni's grip on Uganda. Things got even more intense when Gaddafi made a surprise visit to Uganda in 2008. Museveni's administration saw it as more than just a visit. They believed it was a planned assassination attempt against their president. Then came a sharp pivot. Speaking for 37 minutes at an Arab youth event in Uganda, Gaddafi announced he was shifting tactics. Instead of working with elected presidents like Museveni, he'd focus on traditional African leaders to push his vision of a united Africa. In 2009, he brought together these traditional rulers to discuss continental unification. But Museveni wasn't about to let that happen. He blocked Ugandan traditional leaders from attending the meeting. To make matters worse, Museveni convinced Gaddafi that US President George Bush had lifted sanctions on Libya and promised investment if Gaddafi gave up his weapons of mass destruction. What Gaddafi didn't realize was that British diplomats tipped him off. Museveni had effectively betrayed him, selling him out after their talks. The biggest mistake that ultimately sealed Gaddafi's fate: he never had a powerful enough nuclear weapon to deter NATO forces. That vulnerability left him exposed, and it cost him everything. Since then, Museveni has tried to pick up where Gaddafi left off, pushing for financial and security unity across African nations. But here's the catch. While Museveni has some strengths, he doesn't have the deep pockets or the magnetic charisma needed to truly pull it off. And even if he manages some progress, he probably won't get the support he needs. Why? Because the West opposes him for the exact same reasons they went after Gaddafi. In a striking 2021 speech, Museveni openly admitted that Western powers have limited and self-serving goals. Ironically, these are the very same people he once betrayed by selling out Gaddafi. Just 2 years after Gaddafi was overthrown, the mosque in Uganda named in his honor, the Gaddafi Mosque, was quietly renamed to appease the local government. It's clear Museveni feared Gaddafi more than any other African leader. The only way he could have kept his distance was by not resorting to blackmail. And when the time comes for Museveni to step down, don't expect anyone to come to his rescue. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the man who betrayed Muammar Gaddafi. What's your take on this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more eye-opening videos like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.